they go out, except that they disappeared beyond the horizon. I could no longer see them.
Well, thank you very, very much, Officer Ketcher. Thank you very much.
7-4 Romeo, Morgantown.
Through the cooperation of Mr. Harry Shaw, who's the chief of the FAA office here at Morgantown, and Charles Derry, they have very kindly agreed to let Mr. Derry summarize briefly the events that took place that night. Officer Ketcher, who contacted Mr. Derry doing the main FAA work here. Thank you very much, Mr. Derry. Thank you very much.
A minute. At 2:55 Greenwich Mean Time was a Lake Central airliner on the ground at Morgantown. The airliner was going to take off south, and while he was taxiing north to the runway, he called me on the radio, and he asked that I get my glasses and look to the northeast of the airport. From his position on the ground, he had seen a white light, and I immediately got out of my seat and picked up the glasses to see what I could observe in that quadrant. But he told me that it had disappeared and there was no need to look. He said it was possible that it may have been a meteorite. At this time, as he concluded this statement, a pilot of a Beechcraft westbound, who was 18 miles west of Morgantown, called and said that he saw 4 objects in the sky. That he described them as having a large orange glow with a very brilliant white light trailing from the glow. And since the Lake Central pilot had made the comment that perhaps it was a meteorite, I asked the pilot of the Beechcraft if they could be meteorites. And his comment was that it would be the first time that I ever saw meteorites flying formation. His description of these objects, he said they were traveling at an extremely high rate of speed. They were traveling just about due north, and he estimated their altitude at 30,000 feet. The pilot advised that these objects looked to him just about the way a rocket would look if it was flying level. He advised that the objects were flying parallel to the Earth's surface. I called the Cleveland Traffic Control Center to report the pilot's statements, and he told me that the controller told me that he had been talking to about 3 or 4 other pilots in the area who had reported essentially the same objects as we were. After discussing this with the traffic controller in Cleveland, I called the UFO officer at Wright Patterson Air Force Base at Dayton. However, the telephone operator there told me that he had been very busy for the past couple of hours taking reports from over the area about the same type of sightings. About this time, Officer Catcher from the Morgantown Police Force came into the station and described what he had seen. I didn't prompt him in any way. I let him describe his experience, and his description was almost identical with the description that the pilot of the Beechcraft had given me. However, from the from the direction that the Lake Central pilot had indicated he had seen in a light, and from Officer Catcher's description, it appears that there would have been three objects northeast of the airport. The four objects which were flying in formation, which were reported by the pilot of the Beechcraft, would have been about 60 miles west. So apparently there were two groups of objects. The Beechcraft was 18 miles west of Morgantown, and he estimated the distance of the objects as being about 45 miles west of his position. In a few minutes after this was terminated, I received a call from the FAA operator at Altoona, Pennsylvania, who advised me that he had received some telephone calls. Three objects answering the same description were sighted over Somerset, Pennsylvania, and a little later another report of three objects answering the same description over Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Somerset is northeast of Morgantown, and Johnstown is north of Somerset. The thing that was most impressive, I think, about these reports was that they are different from anything else that I have had reported to me over the years at my position here at the FAA. And everybody appeared to be impressed by the brilliancy of the white light that trailed the orange ball. This was described by the pilot of this Beechcraft. He said that this large orange ball had a brilliant white light trailing behind it that he estimated to be about half a mile long. This is the white light appeared to trail the orange ball. This description should be that the orange ball seemed to be the leading part of the light, and from it, and for a distance of about a half a mile, this brilliant white light trailed immediately behind the orange ball.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Charles Derry, for your very fine corroborative report. This recording is going to be given by Sergeant William Musgrave, who the patrolman William Musgrave, who was on the desk here at the city building the night that Officer George Catcher phoned in his observation. This recording is being made on Wednesday, the 6th of March, 1968. From the desk here, there are two windows facing north, from which Officer Musgrave was able to see for a few seconds the objects which George Catcher had reported. It's quite obvious as you look out this window, you can see the sky, which would give you a glimpse of these northward passing objects, which Sergeant Musgrave saw as soon as Officer Catcher called in. The city desk here is 1 block south of Willie Street, along Fayette Street, which also goes east to west, with the windows of the desk here pointing north. When Officer Musgrave looked out of the window, which would be the most westward window, he could see these objects going on a northward path for quite a few seconds. That is, out of the west end of Fayette Street. Now, Officer Musgrave, Patrolman Musgrave, would you please just simply verbalize the events that took place that night?
Sergeant Catcher had just left the station and had given me a call from the cruiser at 9:45. I answered his call and was in the process of writing it on a radio log when he started hollering that he to the other car, do you see those objects in the sky? Do you see those objects in the sky? And of course, my curiosity got me up out of the chair, and he said they're flying to the north. And as I looked out the window, I saw 3 objects in the sky. One was leading the others by a good distance, and the other 2 were kind of side by side, with one following the other a short distance. During this time, the phone rang, and I let it ring 3 times so that I could continue watching them cross the sky, but being as an emergency phone, I stopped looking and went to answer it. And by the time I got back, they were no longer in sight. To pinpoint the time exactly, the occurrence had to happen at 9:46 to 47 p.m.
How long, Patrolman Musgrave, would you say, just roughly in seconds, was it that you glimpsed the object?
Approximately 3 seconds to 4.
And from your view here in the office, the sky was clear. There weren't any clouds. How was you remember?
I remember it was a black outline. There were no stars showing whatsoever. It was completely dark except for these objects, which were very well illuminated.
You couldn't see the moon from where you were?
No, sir. There were no stars.
Did these lights, when you saw them for these few minutes, give you the impression that they might have been solid, or what do you remember your fleeting impression as to the nature of these bodies? Did you form an opinion?
Well, what entered my mind at the time to picture them by, I thought of a jet engine where the light comes out the rear and the fire, the exhaust of the jet system, and it was circular in shape, but a jet glow, when it's in the sky, generally has a blue look to it, if you can see it, and these had a reddish orange to yellowish orange nature of color.
Did they give you the impression of being solid?
They definitely give me an impression of being one solid mass with a glow to them and a slight tail.
You didn't see any outlines of a dark body behind them or something they might be attached to?
No, sir, there was no outlines of anything except the fire.
And when you saw them, of course, you were looking out through the window pane of the westward window here in the office. You didn't see them through the air. You saw them through the pane of the window.
I do not remember whether I was looking directly through the pane or whether I had raised the window to look out. I believe I did raise the window.
In other words, you saw them most likely without looking through the pane.
That's correct.
And did you hear any noise of any kind?
There was no noise whatsoever of any kind.
And would you say that they were fuzzy or blared or sharply outlined with respect to these categories? What would you say?
I would say they were fuzzy in nature and were not definitely outlined.
And you got the impression that they were self-luminous. They weren't reflecting light from any source. They were their own source of light.
My feeling, yes, sir.
Now, and how about their motion as you saw them?
Their motion seemed to be very swift. I would compare it to a close flying by jet if you had one.
Absolutely straight.
Absolutely straight.
Now, if you, to get this would just be a subjective guess, get some idea of the apparent size, would you say that it would be a pinhead, a pea, a dime, a nickel, a half dollar, silver dollar, orange grapefruit, or perhaps larger? Just where would you say? What would you feel?
And I would have to feel that my vision said they were about, anywhere from a quarter to a nickel in size.
I see.
But they grew smaller as they went along.
I see. And you got the impression they were receding.
That's correct.
You say they got smaller as they went along.
As they went further away.
how did the objects disappear from your view?
Basically, they didn't disappear from my view. As I stated before, I had to go answer the phone, and they were still in my view, but the time I got back, they were gone.
But they would have perhaps disappeared behind the building.
I think the building would have covered them up. I couldn't see to the horizon on account of the building.
Did you have a full many
Cherokee 13 Papa, marker
of
inbound
how
04.
fast
Roger.
you might be going? Form any opinion?
You couldn't
Roger,
form
Comanche,
any
13
opinions.
Papa,
Like I say, they were
marker
moving
inbound 04.
faster than any jet I've seen flying close to the
Faster.
building in this area.
Comanche 13 Papa, Morgantown, affirmative, or your choice. Right now the winds are calm, although they have been 360 at 5 at times.
They
Over.
went faster than the jet planes that you have seen here through these windows.
That's correct.
Comanche 13 Papa.
You had no subjective feeling about how far away the objects were?
Looking on a black background, it is hard to tell, distinguish size or how far they might be away. In reality, they didn't seem like it was more than a mile or two away, but you can't tell.
No, you can't tell. How about the elevation above the horizon in degrees? About how many degrees would you say above your horizon would they be in the sky? Or how many degrees down from your zenith?
I would say the objects were flying approximately 35 to 45 degrees from the horizon.
Do you know of any other people beside Officer Catcher who might have seen these objects which we could contact and collaborate some of this?
Not personally, I do not. I heard one lady call in on a program on the radio station here locally stating that she and her husband had seen them, but I do not believe they require names at that station.
Now, Officer Musgrave, I wonder if you wouldn't mind drawing me a sort of a sketch of what you momentarily saw.
Did not have real long tails, and the tails moved right along with the objects as they flew through space.
How about the relative distance between them? Did they maintain the same relative distance as you?
All through my vision of the time that I saw them, they seemed to hold just about the same particular distance all through their flight.
Would you mark the color of the head, or what you thought it looked like?
Red, orange. Varied, V-A-R-E-D, with yellow orange.
The heads were brighter than the tails. The
Definitely.
Tail,
The tail looked more like a
Cessna 2501
Reddish
Yankee, Morgantown
gold
radio
color.
standby. Comanche 13 Papa on the ground at 07. Roger. Comanche 13 Papa casting flight plan at 07. Cessna 6722 Alpha, Morgantown radio standby. Pacer 16.
Thank you very, very much,
Over.
Mr. Musgrave, for your
Pacer 16 after
report.
Johnstown was that
Very
Victor 106
interesting.
Ceiling Grove, Victor 6
Now,
Amboy, direct report.
Officer Catcher wants to make a few additional notes here. He's down here at the city desk this evening. He wants to make a few comments in addition to the fine report he's already given.
There are essentially two other items that ought to be added to the description previously given. Number one, that all three of these objects were of uniform size, both their heads and also the tails. Secondly, the coloration was orange, somewhat darker than that of the moon. Also, it could be said that there was so much space between the leading objects and the two behind that under no circumstances could these three UFOs be construed as being from the one and same object. They were entirely different, too much spacing between the front and the rear two UFOs.
Thank you very, very much, George. Thank you very much. We should add to these notes that Mr. Musgrave, in describing the sky, was looking out from a lighted room, and he was looking in a very prescribed region, and the sky appeared completely dark to him, and he saw no stars, which of course is only natural. This is not at variance with the description of the sky given by Officer Catcher, but really collaborates what Officer Catcher has already said. I have looked out of the windows here through which Mr. Musgrave has looked, and I can see the sky would appear very, very dark. Even, in fact, it would probably be difficult to see the stars on a somewhat hazy night. And looking out of a lighted room, of course, would give the impression of a dark sky. But this is not contradictory and completely collaborates what Officer Catcher has already said.
Key 4674 Romeo, Morgantown Radio.